Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we're going to talk mainly about the coronavirus, some more of the symptoms. This time they're finding that it's affecting the brain, causing dementia and other problems. Also, President of the United States, Donald Trump, coming down with COVID-19, but taking what he calls a cure, which is this cocktail called Regeneron. We'll talk about those and really what some of the doctors are saying about it. And also a little bit on the economy. And first, the beaches and COVID-19 being found in the water. Well, beaches have reopened in San Diego, California, and that has raised questions as to whether it is really safe to go in the water. Well, recently, a viewer sent in a question to Channel 8 News asking, does seawater, referring to the ocean, kill COVID-19? Well, the news station asked Dr. Charles Gerba, a professor of environmental microbiology at the University of Arizona, for the answer.
Dr. Gerba was uncertain as to whether the coronavirus could be killed by the ocean's salt water, but was more concerned about areas like Imperial Beach that are already contaminated by untreated sewage runoff. Yeah, Dr. Gerba did say there were 2 studies which have pointed to infection in the water. Now, even though no cases have been reported by the CDC of illness coming from the ocean's contaminated waters, there is concern that the virus could get airborne by the waves that come crashing on the beaches.
Right, and what they're finding with that sewer is that actually is the source of getting the coronavirus into the waterways being dumped from the public sewer.
That's right.
Into the
that's
water.
right. Absolutely correct.
Well, the number of people filing for unemployment in America last week was 840,000, which is down slightly from the week before, but it does not look great for the country's economic recovery. Add to that, new coronavirus cases are on the rise across the country, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight.
That's right. Well, Wisconsin is among the hardest hit states right now, being the largest hotspot. The testing site lines are long and the hospital beds are running out fast as the coronavirus has taken over. Well, to give you an idea, just one healthcare system, that's ThedaCare in northeastern Wisconsin, has reported a 500% increase in those admitted to their hospitals, and over 200 of their staff are home sick or in quarantine because of the virus.
Wow. Well, Dr. Imran Andrabi, the president and CEO of ThedaCare, told CBS Evening News, I only have about 5 ICU beds left and about 10 medical or surgical beds left in my entire healthcare system. But Wisconsin is only one out of 31 states now seeing an increase in cases of COVID-19. Now, New York and New Jersey have reported the most cases that they've seen since May.
Yeah, so over half the United States is experiencing a continual increase. Well, even though so many people are falling ill with the virus, there are protests in places like Brooklyn, where a group of Catholics and Orthodox Jews each filed lawsuits because of the new mandated lockdowns in some neighborhoods in New York City. Well, one woman from Boston told CBS News, she said, "This is not a game. This is something serious." That was Marie Verde, who spoke from experience and is now herself recovering from COVID-19.
Well, she, along with 8 other family members, all have been infected with the virus. Among them, her father, Juan Ciprian, who died last week. Now, Marie explained he did not take any precautions because of the pandemic. It was life as normal for Juan, but now he is gone.
But President Trump has said the experimental medicine he received from Regeneron made him feel well immediately. He even said after just 24 hours of entering the hospital, he was ready to go home. However, not everyone thinks someone as influential as the president should be calling it a cure.
Well, Dr. Mutarza Akhtar from the University of Arizona College of Medicine told Associated Press Regeneron may have some treatment effects, but it's not a cure. Now, people can still get the disease. People still have symptoms. Even Regeneron itself would say nobody has been cured of it. Now, if anything, maybe it decreases some of the symptoms, but we still need better data on that. But there's absolutely, without a doubt, 100% no cure for COVID, and to pitch it as such is a lie and is dangerous.
Well, that's interesting that you hear that coming from a pharmaceutical company, because most of the times they want their products to be looked at as a cure, because people equate that to, hey, I'm going to get better, so let's take more, which increases sales. So it's interesting that they're taking that stance. Well, Dr. Akhtar also believes even though the president received the Regeneron drug, it's debatable that it was necessary for him to get it. And he added, it's much more debatable whether it helped him or not. Well, to let that be the one piece of evidence to say we should be giving it, it's far-fetched. Dr. Akhtar also pointed to the fact that if the president was just experiencing the first wave of symptoms, he could experience more in the future, and he said it could also be much worse as a result. The doctor's advice to all was simple. Everybody needs to stay vigilant. Everybody, whether they have COVID or they don't have COVID, needs to be very careful.
Well, we're now going to turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has been doing a little bit more research on the doctors and scientists saying that they're looking for a cure and how they're looking for it, where they're looking for it, and also a short video from the World Health Organization and some information there regarding COVID-19. Larry, what do you have for us?
The predictions of the leading experts is that before COVID has run its course, everyone who meets a certain criteria will have contracted it. The plague has now struck the White House, and in response, the nation has mobilized its chief experimentalist with the hope of saving lives. The president was recently admitted to Walter Reed Hospital and has received multiple pharmaceuticals, including some typically reserved for those suffering from severe cases of COVID infection. In addition to those, President Trump also reportedly received an experimental concoction called Regeneron, which is not available to the public, but was requested and received by the president under a compassionate use request. The pharmaceutical is being concocted by corporate scientists from antibodies harvested from the blood of individuals battling COVID infection. And in preparation for being offered on the market, the concoction is now being manufactured through the bodies of patented rodents to streamline its production. The capitalist push to capitalize on the virus has many contenders, however. Here's a video from the chief of the World Health Organization offering his thoughts on the efficacy of the vaccines.
We have no guarantee that any single vaccine now in development will work. We have no guarantee that any single vaccine now in development will work. We have no guarantee that any single vaccine now in development will work. The more candidates we test, the higher the chance we will have a safe and efficacious vaccine. Almost 200 vaccines for COVID-19 are currently in clinical and preclinical testing. The history of vaccine development tells us that some will fail and some will succeed. The COVAX facility enables governments to spread the risk of vaccine development and ensure their populations can have early access to effective vaccines. Even more importantly, the COVAX facility is the mechanism that will enable a globally coordinated rollout for the greatest possible impact. The COVAX facility will help to bring the pandemic under control, save lives, accelerate the economic recovery, and ensure that the race for vaccines is a collaboration, not a contest. This is not charity. It's in every country's best interest. We sink or we swim together. We sink or we swim together.
YPN News. I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely something, this COVID-19 or coronavirus, as it's known, is something that is basically surpassing all boundaries internationally, global lines and so forth, and it's affecting every facet of life. And it's, the World Health Organization, making those statements, it just shows how much of an impact this is having on all people. Well, President Trump, in a White House lawn press conference, touted what he considered a miracle drug regarding the COVID-19 drug made by Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. He received that particular treatment while he was at Walter Reed Medical Facility after being diagnosed with COVID-19. Well, the drug is considered a therapeutic cocktail mixture of monoclonal antibodies and is undergoing testing, and of course, as of yet, is not FDA approved. The drug was also produced using the cells of aborted fetuses, a practice which the current White House administration opposes.
Well, just last year, the government pulled funding for companies using cells derived from aborted fetal tissue, but a White House spokesperson told CBS News the cells used for Regeneron's cocktail came from a fetus aborted before the funding was pulled. Therefore, the therapy is not a violation of their policy. Now, CBS reporter Kate Smith spoke to CBS News regarding how the fetal cells are used in the cocktail. She said it's a therapeutic used to boost the immunity of the patient before their immune system has the opportunity to develop its own immunity itself.
Well, Regeneron is using a HEK2993 T cell. That's a tissue cell that was aborted in the 1970s in the Netherlands from the kidney area. Well, these fetal tissue cells are used to test the potency of a medication. A Regeneron spokesperson said that in the final product, that fetal tissue is not used, but it is used in the testing phase, and he said that's a common practice in the industry. Well, another drug called remdesivir, which is an antiviral drug, was also used in President Trump's treatment, and it was also tested in the same manner using those aborted fetal cells.
What's interesting is that the 1970s, 50 years ago, still having those cells, it just seems like a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah, that is.
Well, the controversy for most is not that the drugs are being used, but that the White House is using these drugs and Trump is touting them and saying that it is a blessing from God that he contracted COVID-19. And after 3 years in office, with the Trump administration fighting against companies using aborted fetal cells for testing their drugs, it's like an about face when it comes to the president having those same drugs used on him, which is 180 degrees from what the administration worked so hard previously to prevent from taking place.
And it seems like, if the controversy is not using cells from aborted fetuses, when would it matter when those fetuses were aborted, and from where those cells came from? It's still from the same source. So It's interesting, like, it was said in the report that, well, when it's used on the president, it's okay, but let's not do that for anyone else. Well, as we continue to learn about the coronavirus and the many long-term effects it can have on a person, even after the initial quote-unquote recovery stage of the virus, we're going to dive a little deeper into another side effect the virus has on mankind, this time the brain. We'll take a look at this video to gain a little more understanding on COVID-19 and its effect on the human brain.
So as we learn more about coronavirus, we're seeing the different effects that the virus can have on a person, even after they've recovered from the illness. So today we're going to be talking with Dr. George about the neurological effects that COVID-19 can have on someone. Sure. So I'm just going to launch right into the million-dollar question here that I think as we learn more about the virus and we see all of these different symptoms and conditions that it can cause, but I think it's interesting because we know that COVID-19 is a respiratory illness. So ultimately, how does a respiratory virus cause damage to our brain and nervous system?
That's a very good question. So this coronavirus, it really enters the body, and this is what we're starting to understand more and more, is that it enters the body through the respiratory system. But what starts to happen is as it enters, it starts to cause more of a systemic problem for us. There are several different ways that coronavirus can actually affect the brain. The first way is that it can enter the body. It can cause this very bad respiratory illness. And in causing a bad respiratory illness, what starts to happen is that your body stops being able to take in as much oxygen. Your brain is very, very dependent upon oxygen, as you can imagine. More than 80% of the blood that you actually pump from your heart that's oxygenated goes to your brain. And it's very important that it gets all of that oxygen because it needs oxygen second to second. What starts to happen in a lot of these coronavirus patients that have very bad respiratory disease is that that amount of oxygen starts to drop that goes to their brain. And if that happens for long enough, you can start to have what's called hypoxic ischemic injury to your brain, which means that a lot of the brain tissue that normally is responsible for getting a lot of the oxygen and for activities, for you to remember things, for you to be cognitively aware, all of those brain tissue starts to get affected by this low levels of oxygen. And as that continues to happen, then you start to have longer lasting effects. We're starting to realize is one of the first feelings of this is a delirium, where you're not fully aware of what's going on and you start to act in an abnormal way.
So I read a little bit about these neurological conditions. You mentioned delirium was one of them. What other examples are there? Are there like severe cases of it? Is delirium a severe case? Are there more mild symptoms? Kind of walk us through what specific conditions besides delirium that you're seeing.
So delirium is one of the first manifestations that we're seeing from this hypoxic damage, this hypoxic ischemic damage. Just recently, a study was done on some of the patients that had actually passed away from COVID-19, and they looked at their brain just to get a feeling as to what was happening to these patients. And they saw evidence all throughout of this hypoxic ischemic damage throughout. So that is very concerning because a lot of these patients were not starting to wake up, and a lot of these patients started to have worsening and worsening damage to their brain. So depending on how severe the illness is, you can have a differing amount of damage as well as symptoms from that damage. COVID-19 then also has this other ability to attack your brain cells directly as well. So the first way that I was mentioning was this hypoxic ischemic damage, where the lungs don't produce enough oxygen towards the body just because it's being affected by the virus. But then what happens is you can actually start to attack the brain, the coronavirus can actually start to attack the brain in itself. And what it does is that that same ACE receptor that's responsible for the coronavirus attaching to the lung tissue is actually expressed on several areas of the brain. And those areas deal with autoregulation of your blood pressure and autoregulation of your respiratory drive and your alertness centers and things like that. And when the coronavirus starts to attack those areas, it's starting to be theorized that those could be in relation to why the coronavirus is actually causing more delirium and potentially coma in some of these patients. The other thing that coronavirus also seems to do is cause this systemic inflammation. And this is seen several days and weeks out into the disease process. And these are in that severe case patient population. And what starts to happen is this inflammation takes over all throughout the body, and it causes you to become very, very hypercoagulable, which means that you start to clot in all of your organs. We saw that originally in the lung. So a lot of people had a pulmonary embolism. We saw that in the kidneys, and people would start to lose function of their kidneys. We started to see this in the brain as well. And so people started to have strokes. Those strokes came in both varieties, in which patients would come in and they would have what we would call microthrombosis, so little clots all throughout the brain. And this would cause a big function of delirium. And then we would see patients that would have microclots that would turn into bleeds. So then they would have bleeding inside the brain as well. So you'd see both bleeding and clotting in this in the brain at the same time. So this is why neurologists and especially neurointensivists were getting very involved in the management of these patients, because we started to see these neurological complications.
Well, Katan, this is actually the latest now symptom there that they're saying is from the COVID-19 causing the dementia or affecting the brain. So we know other organs have already been affected, but this is the first time they're really honing in on the brain and how it's affected or affecting some with this confusion of the mind.
Yeah, and you know, as we've reported before, of course, every organ in your body is important. We know how COVID-19 has affected the lungs. That was the initial thing, because everyone felt it was a respiratory infection, and then they found how it was affecting the heart. Then they realized, oh, it's causing a lot of blood clots in the body, you know. But when your brain starts to go out, right, you know, that governs so many other systems in your body, as well as your thinking process and the decision-making process that you have to use on a daily basis. It kind of makes you wonder, you know, we talk about the asymptomatic people who are out there, you know, what about people who are, you know, making, you know, life-changing decisions, who have this confusion of their mind? You know, you kind of wonder what it could lead to in the long run for the rest of us.
Right. Yeah, definitely something that I'm sure science is going to take, and the doctors are going to take a little bit closer look at, especially there robbing the oxygen. You know, it starves the brain, not getting the right amount of nutrients and so forth, but causing that confusion in the brain, like you said, definitely not great for making decisions.
That's right. Well, if you'd like a little bit more clarity of mind in regards to decisions that will ensure peace and safety for you and your family, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you'd like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number on your screen. And once again, don't forget to go to YisraelSays.com or AskYisrael.com for 2 excellent Bible study tools on the market, absolutely free. Type in your search up top. You'll pull up pages and pages of information guaranteed to occupy your time, beneficially occupying your time on any topic in the Holy Scriptures.
Well, don't go anywhere. Get your Holy Scriptures and a pencil and some paper to take some notes, because up next is a very informative sermon from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.